Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Department of Defense's 35th Annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Observance Ceremony. Please stand for the arrival of the official party. Mr. Michael L. Rose, Director of Administration. Office of the Chief Management Officer, Mr. Robert K. Goodwin, our keynote speaker. And Pastor John P. Goodlow, Sr. from the Armed Forces Retirement Home here in D.C., who will provide the invocation and benediction. Please remain standing for the singing of our national anthem and the invocation.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Pastor John Goodlow will now deliver the invocation.
I'm asking, please, that each of you, and I'm sure this is the case, that each of you has a custom or a tradition that you invoke whenever you have prayer, whenever you involve yourself in meditation, or are in some period of solemnity. Would you do that now, please, even as I pray? For I will be using my tradition, and we thank you for this. Dear God, our Father, you who are the creator and maker of the universe, you who have set the stars in place, and you, O God, who looked and saw that there was a need on this earth for your masterpiece of creation. And so you made man, and we're so grateful for that. We're thankful that we have come into this place to honor one who has gone on before us, one who has made his mark, and one who has done such a wonderful job in paving the way for those of us who will come after him, but for those of us who believe in him and hold on to what it is that he left us. We thank you for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We thank you for the words that he spoke. We thank you for the things that he gave of himself. And we are so grateful for this. Dr. King said at one time that the American fabric is based in its destiny. And the destiny of America is freedom. And so those of us who may have been disenfranchised, those of us who are still feeling oppressed, and those of us who have some period of bondage in our lives, might even say, as he says, that the destiny of those who are oppressed is coupled with and tied with the destiny of America. We thank you for this, O God. Dr. King also said that one of the principles of nonviolence is indeed the principle of love. And you have spoken this, O God, in your word. For you said that love suffers long and is kind. Love envies not, love vaunts not itself, is not puffed up, does not behave itself unseemly, seeks not her own, is not easily provoked, does not seek its own retribution, for it holds on to no wrongs. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And so we're grateful for this, for the absolute love that we see in you. For you gave your life that we might have life. And so, O God, we stand here on this day, remembering what this man did for us as Americans. And he said, you said, O God, in your word, that we ought to give up those things that are childish and hold on to those things that are of you. For faith, hope, love now abide. But the greatest is love. So help us not only to love, but help us also to remember. We honor you in this way, O God. We praise you now, O Lord, and, O Master, in that which is the tradition of all of us who are involved now in this time of prayer. We end this prayer in that tradition that is mine, in the name of all that is lovely, in the name of all that is of you, O God, in the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the saving name, Jesus. Let us all say amen.
Amen. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Michael Rose.
So I will say that we have a Marine vocalist that can really sing, and we have a pastor that can really pray. So we're off to a great start. This is one of my favorite events. And so thank you very much and welcome. We appreciate you joining us here today on our 35th annual Martin Luther King Observance here at the Pentagon. To all those who are present, to the 26,000 who work in this building that it's being broadcast to, those who might be watching, to the other 30,000 in the National Capital Region that it is being broadcast to in the other facilities, and to those who will watch this later as it is also being taped and will be rebroadcast on Armed Forces Network, we thank you very much for joining us today, and I think you will really enjoy the speaker that we have for you today. I do need to take a moment in greatest seriousness to thank all those who made this happen. Certainly the vocalist from the President's Own, Pastor, thank you very much, Pastor Goodlow. To those in the protocol team, Washington Headquarters Services team, the events team, all the organizational reps that come together to put these events on, just want to thank you. Also want to thank some special guests. The pastor, Pastor Goodlow, is from the Armed Forces Retirement Home up here in D.C., in Northwest D.C., and he brought a crew with him. And so we have some gentlemen down here in the front row, and ladies, I'm sorry, I'm not looking all the way down, I got to look further, I only look this far, who are with us here today and joining us, and I just want to say thank you for being here, but thank you for your service as well. And when I was in Hawaii, they used to always say, talk story, tell a few tales. And if you want to get a cool talk story, go to the gentleman in the red sweatshirt. I believe you met Dr. King a few years back. So if you want to talk story, there's a gentleman you can speak with. I do want to also thank all the senior leaders who are here today. Thank you very much for making the time to be with us. The many guests and the family for coming here today. and especially our guest speaker, Mr. Goodwin, and his wife, Ruth. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for your flexibility. We had a few adjustments today. Thank you for everybody's flexibility for the adjustments on the timing today. I love this department, Department of Defense. This is, as you may have noted, our 35th annual recognition. If you go back in the calendar, that takes you to 1985. And if you look in the history of the Martin Luther King Observance, you'll find that it started in 1986. The law was passed in 85, but actually the first observance was 1986. This department's always ahead. So we actually started our observance before the federal holiday actually was first recognized. But I think that's who this department is about. We recognize, we embrace. It's important that we consider Dr. King's continuing work, because his effect and his impact is still continuing. While his life was cut short at 39, it's an immensely powerful life that still drives us today. And from every one of these events, I still pull more of that power, and I know we will again today with the speaker. This year's theme is issued by the King Center in Atlanta, as they do every year. And the theme is King's Vision, Humanity Tied in a Single Garment of Destiny. He championed a movement that drew from the deep well of America's thirst for freedom. His vision for America was captured in his perpetual message of hope and the possibility of a future for all Americans that would be anchored in dignity, sensitivity, and mutual respect. His message was unchanging. Social change can be achieved in America, but violence is not the answer. So it's right that we come together today to celebrate his dream and his vision of unity. I would like to take a moment to thank you for how you perpetuate that dream and all that you do. I find that the people of this department are some of the most giving, committed individuals, volunteering your time, whether it be at the church or the mosque or the youth league or the chapel or the synagogue, and all your efforts that you do. I find that when we have our combined federal campaign, Department of Defense is always leading the pack with the giving, even in the years of furloughs and other times. And I feel for those who are being impacted by that right now. But this is a department that has raised their hand and volunteered, especially those in uniform, to do whatever is required of them. And it is just a great family to be a part of. So thank you for all that you do to help perpetuate that dream. Dr. King's work continues. He showed us the right way to lead, the right way to be peacefully protest, and the right way to inspire. He made our nation stronger, and he made it better. So I'm so happy that you can join with us here today. In a moment, I'll bring up our guest speaker. I will tell you, you have Mr. Goodwin's bio in the program there. It doesn't even begin to touch who he is and what his life has been. The young man who went to Oral Roberts, the young man who went back to his family's paper, the young man who has started businesses as he grew to be a little bit of an older man, and as he went along through life. His work on the Points of Life Foundation, the privilege of being able to meet the late President Bush and work with him and Mrs. Bush. Just a life full and well-lived, and a story that is going to be great to hear. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Bob Goodwin.
Thank you, Michael, and it's my great honor to share the stage with men and women of accomplishment and responsibility at this great commemorative service. And I'm appreciative that the organizers of this program, Ray, Michael, and others, would find in my story and my perspective worthy of this prestigious platform. And I want to assure you I do not take such a responsibility lightly. I want to spend the few moments that remain with us today to focus on what was the fulcrum of dynamism, as I would like to speak of it, by which Dr. King made his most enduring impact. If I had to emphasize or distill the two primary points for your memory today, they would be resiliency and resolve. What Rich and Michael didn't know when the kind invitation was extended, that in my seminary training, I did my master's thesis on Dr. King, and not only did I find in my study an affinity that spoke to my head and to my heart, I carried that perspective throughout the various stages of my career, moving sometimes seamlessly between the entrepreneurial and the educational and the nonprofit arenas. So if you don't mind, I would like to personalize to some degree our theme today by providing a little glimpse into my own family history and heritage and the heritage of my home city and state and country. My family is and has perhaps for the last 30 years been the last remaining residents or operators of a business in the historic Greenwood district. Wikipedia says Greenwood is a historic freedom district in Tulsa, Oklahoma. As one of the most prominent concentrations of African American businesses in the United States during the early 20th century, it was popularly known as America's Black Wall Street until the race riot of 1921, in which white residents set fire to more than 30 blocks, 1,200 homes, and killing, by some estimates, nearly 300 people. On the morning of June 2nd, Greenwood awoke to ashes. While the riot was one of the most devastating massacres in the annals of U.S. race relations, Greenwood would not die. 10 years after the massacre, surviving residents rebuilt much of the district. They accomplished this despite the opposition of many white Tulsa political and business leaders and punitive rezoning laws enacted to prevent Reconstruction. It resumed being a Black vital community until segregation was overturned by the federal government during the 50s and the 60s. I think of the stories of my parents. I think of the recognition of this great horror that the community of Tulsa is now reckoning with, and I can't help but reflect on the poetic balm of Maya Angelou, who penned, "Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise." And so the residents of this community rebuilt. And the resiliency sprung forth from the hearts and souls and hands of the survivors that caused them to rebuild and to do so in a way that did not seek retribution or harbor dishonor. Continuing from Wikipedia, Edward L. Goodwin, a young entrepreneur, was one of the pioneers who led the resurgence of Greenwood during the Depression years. In 1937, Goodwin bought the Tulsa Star, changed the name to the Oklahoma Eagle. Today, the Goodwin family still publishes the weekly paper a few doors down and across the street from its original site. This was recorded in Wikipedia. But ending that quotation, I will tell you that yes, E.O. Goodwin Sr. was my father. And though he is a 19-year-old student home from the summer from Fisk University, had to take refuge in a bathtub as marauding gangs rode through North Tulsa, firing indiscriminately machine guns into the homes and hurling torches, and others dropping barrels of burning oil from the sky. He and his father and their wives and children were among the remnants who determined to rise from the ashes. So mine is a special reverence for the life and witness of Dr. King and the resiliency and the resolve that he embodied, because I and my family were, in our own small way, partners in his campaign for human dignity and beneficiaries of his dream. Though my father started several other small businesses rooted in and supported by this historic community, he went on to law school at 50 years old, and in doing so helped integrate the University of Tulsa. But in the newspaper had a special mandate as a clarion voice for the voiceless. The Oklahoma Eagle, in the tradition of Freedom's Journal, the Chicago Daily Defender, the Amsterdam News, became a part of the vital network of community organs that helped to rekindle the conscience of a nation, repudiating those actions present in all of our institutions that contradicted the American values of justice and equality. Dr. King was killed when I was a sophomore in college, but the impact of his life on me was such from that time forward. I was to be in the forefront of the struggles for fair housing, economic development, voting rights, equal employment, school desegregation in my hometown. After my seminary training, at the behest of my father, rather than moving into a career in the ministry, I came back to assume the management of the family newspaper, which I did through the decade of the 70s, before turning the reins over to my attorney brother, who today, at nearly 80 years old, still carries on the campaign. But I and my family were not alone. Along with the yearnings emanating from the black church and the historically black colleges and universities, from the many fraternal and community organizations that sprung up to address the needs of aspirations from that time, people of goodwill, people of races of all background, committed to opening minds, convicting hearts, changing laws, and dashing barriers. So this was a time of great change. And it goes without elaborating that slavery, racial strife, economic disparities sustained by apartheid and segregation is not a uniquely American phenomenon. We can see through the prism of history that Dr. King happened to be thrust onto the world stage in the middle of the 20th century in the southern territories of these United States, when we were evolving from a society comfortable with the subjugation of an entire group of people based on the color of their skin, and the animus that was used throughout our institutions to maintain that order, that was struggling to make real the fundamental belief in the credo of Jefferson and his band of rebels, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Dr. King was a student of philosophy, theology, world history, and by my own study, tracing the intellectual footsteps, I found that he was as much at home with Aristotle, Plato, Aquinas, Immanuel Kant, Karl Barth, Reinhold Niebuhr, Howard Thurman, as well as Camus, Sartre, and Nietzsche. His was also a profound adherence to the Judeo-Christian heritage of his homeland, not Africa, but Georgia, USA. He believed that after all of the violence and the struggle and the political expediency and vitriol, some of which is all too familiar to us today, that when all is said and done, that we have evolved from the genius of the same Creator, that we are of one blood, one race, the human race, and as such we are inextricably bound and endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Yes, Dr. King was rooted in the teachings of Christian ethics, but he would have us know that there is a deeper implication within the social nature of ethics. He would instruct us that the moralist, or one who measures subjective reality against broad universalistic standards, has a grave responsibility. Not only does he study the institutions and practices of society for what they do, he must tell them, perhaps in the spirit of the prophet, what they could be made to do. The sit-ins and the marches and dogs being set on nonviolent protesters will be forever etched in our communal memories and in part epitomized the era in which King lived. It was a unique moment in time. But these nightmarish images do not define him or his legacy. Dr. King, buttressed by the faith passed on to him by his grandmother, honed in the tutelage of some of the most influential thinkers of all ages, and prompted by the circumstances of a just boycott, answered the call. While Gandhi answered the call in South Africa and India with his soul force and the conviction that love conquers hate, he profoundly impacted Dr. King's own philosophy and strategy, which came to typify the soul of the civil rights movement. When Dr. King answered the call, at the core of his resolve were the ethical mores which undergirded and sustained him. And I'm just going to refer to these mores as the attitude which flows from this recognition of the inherent brotherhood of men. Things are greatly different today than they were in 1921, to be sure. We have experienced monumental change in progress. Laws and attitudes and customs that were common then are almost unfathomable to most today. And they've given rise to a more open society where men and women are not restricted by the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth. So what then is Dr. King's message to us today? We have real challenges facing us. African Americans have a deep responsibility for the improvement of our communities. I honor the work of contemporary men and women of integrity and valor, like Dr. Ben Carson, who established himself as a world-renowned surgeon, but who also built a career of motivating and inspiring young black men and women to honor the sacrifices and struggles of their parents and grandparents, to prepare themselves to take advantage of the opportunities that have been made available to them. And most importantly, we must resist the temptations of culture which insidiously undermine the creation and preservation of strong family units, which are fundamental to community health and well-being. None other than civil rights firebrand Reverend Jesse Jackson would find agreement with Dr. Carson, though they might have a difference of political opinion or on other matters. When Jesse Jackson, as a disciple and aide to Dr. King and later the founder of Operation Breadbasket, which became Operation Push, said, "Nobody can save us but us." And yes, regrettably, there will be issues in employment and education and housing and voting rights and other such areas that will require vigilant commitment to fairness and equity. But still we rise. There is now a broader question. Are our communal attitudes influenced by the resiliency and resolve? And will that bring a great sense of responsibility? I see my family history, that I briefly touched on earlier, interwoven with the history of my hometown as a story that is still being written. One of history's main lessons is don't be the person who grudgingly accepts the inevitability of atrocious things. The liberals who cautioned Martin Luther King to go slow were cowards in their own way. And the civil rights protesters changed the country by refusing to tolerate the intolerable. The people who gathered and attacked the first black family who moved to Cicero, Illinois, they were not the people that you want to be. The same was true for the ordinary Germans who, during the rise of Hitler, were afraid to speak up. Each contributed to a human catastrophe. And today we admire those like Sophie Scholl. Such a fine, sunny day, and I have to go, she lamented, as a 21-year-old student before she was guillotined by the Nazis for her leadership in the resistance. But what does my death matter, she wrote, if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action? She has a moral equivalent today. Jordan Blue, the bullied gay student who refused to participate when his fellow students all decided to do the Nazi salute. And when faced with evil and the inhumanity that some would impose on others, how will history write your story? The good men who do nothing are not very good at all, because being good in part depends on what you do in response to your circumstances. I'm not suggesting that everyone has to be an activist. Many people don't have the time or the health, but I do think that knowledge confers duty. This period today, at the start of the year 2019, is continuing to forge the hyphen between the 2 years of our life, our birth and our death. And as we try to look at our lives from the perspective of future people, those who might come back perhaps as aliens, or maybe we on our deathbed asking what decisions do we think that we should have made. Now, some, like J. Edgar Hoover, would have rather cast Dr. King in the mode of the seditionist, linked somehow sinisterly with the Communist Party or worse. But I beg to differ. Dr. King was a patriot and an optimist. He believed deeply in the promise of America. He knew that in America we have the opportunity to declare to the world and for all ages that we, black men, white men, brown men, red men, Jew, Christian, Gentile, Buddhist, Sikh, and atheists, we are inextricably bound. And we must recognize that we are in a pact, that we must learn to live together as brothers or die together as fools, he said. We must maintain an acknowledgement of and a commitment to and nourish and support and sometimes act upon those values that remind us of our common humanity and our common destiny and the efficacy of the Golden Rule. Today, as Tulsa, my hometown, moves to appropriately commemorate the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre, that city is struggling with the vestiges of the great communal horror, asking what can be done to ensure never again. And so as they plan their work, their history is being written day by day. And so here we are, for the moment, in the bowels of the one building on earth that contains the brains and the heartbeat of the most formidable and powerful military force ever known to man, honoring the call of Dr. King as well. The men and women of our armed services have done what many can't or won't. They have pledged their all to preserving the values and the heritage of this great nation. Dr. King would say that we must all answer such a call to hold up those values and national commitments that bind us together. We are inextricably bound. And as I hasten to close, one of my favorite inspirational authors, Max Lucado, tells a story that in its own way summarizes the essence of my message that may inspire us as we continue our work toward building a better country and world. Some years back, a reporter covering the conflict in Sarajevo witnessed a little girl shot by a sniper. The back of her head had been blown off, and the reporter stopped being a reporter for a moment. He threw down his pad. He went racing to the man who was holding the child. He helped them both into his car and raced to the hospital with his foot on the accelerator. He turned back, and the man caressing the bleeding child said, "Hurry, my friend, my child is still breathing." A moment later, "Hurry, my friend, my child is still warm." And then, "Hurry, oh my God, my child is getting cold." By the time they arrived at the hospital, the little girl had died. The two men, caressed in grief, they moved to the laboratory where they were washing the blood off their hands and their clothes. And the man turned to the reporter and said, "This is a terrible task for me, for I must go now and tell this man that his child has died." The reporter was stunned. He looked at the man, grieving as he was, and he said, "But I thought she was your child." The man looked back and said, "No, but aren't they all our children?" Not every story has a happy ending, but sometimes those who suffer must know that we believe they belong to all of us. And if all of us respond, resilient in the face of hate and ignorance and apathy and greed, bathed in the resiliency and resolve of our common destiny, there is hope. When we honor and preserve those values exemplified by Dr. King, we may falter and slump, but we will not fail. And America, my America, your America, the America that Dr. King also so passionately loved, will continue to be a bright and shining city on the hill. May we recommit ourselves to that memory and those values which enable this legacy to shine so bright. May God imbue the men and women of the military with protection and courage and wisdom as well as strength. And may God continue to bless America. Thank you so much for being with you.
Please be seated. Mr. Goodwin, resolve, resiliency, serving with honor. Your words, they carry forward the legacy of Dr. King. And I believe for what I have learned about you, your life has been carrying forward that legacy as well. So thank you, sir. Small little memento presented to Robert K. Goodwin for your commitment to service excellence as the keynote speaker for the Department of Defense 35th Annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Observance at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. on January 17, 2019. Sir, thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rhodes.
So I will tell you this is a little bit unfair. I have some closing comments, and then I will bring Pastor Goodloe back up here for a benediction. But when you have an orator as Mr. Goodwin, and you have that voice of Pastor Goodloe, and then you have to be in between them, that is unfair. I will tell you that this is my last one. I'm going to be retiring next week, and I have had the honor and privilege of 13 of these. And every one of them has just hit my heart. I am not nearly as well read and educated as Mr. Goodwin is. Please forgive me if you're from Kentucky, but I'm Kentucky educated, so I'm just going to put it there. But there are a few speeches that always have resonated with me. One is the Gettysburg Address by President Lincoln. How concise and clear, but powerfully moving it could be. I just love reading it. The other one was a speech made when I was 1, so I didn't hear it live, in 1963, when Dr. Martin Luther King was here speaking on the Mall. When he's speaking, when his "I Have a Dream" speech. That one is just so powerful. And there are two parts of it that just I always play over and roll over in my head. First one being that when he says, "I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a world where they are not judged by the color of the skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream." I apologize for the correlation here. That dream that he had is what I feel working for this department in an odd way. The people here who care about what you can do, will you be there when I need you? Your performance, your skill level, not what the color of your skin is, not what your gender is. Will you perform? Will you be there on my left and right, particularly the men and women in uniform? And I love this department for it. We are not perfect, by far, but we work at getting better all the time. And somehow that always just kind of plays in my mind with the life that I've had here in the Department of Defense. The other one that always hits me is later on in his speech. He speaks the words of "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty," and goes through the song. And it ends with "Let freedom ring." And as he gets to the end there, he then starts using that term. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And whenever I read those words, I can hear his voice. Can't you? That iconic voice with those iconic words, I can hear that. So we will bring up the pastor here in just a moment, and then we will leave. But as we leave, we all must continue to let freedom ring. In every action we take, in every word we speak, in the service we perform, in the compassion we show, we must continue to let freedom ring. That powerful life ended so long ago, way too early. It's still with us. So thank you very much for joining us, and now we will have Pastor Goodloe come give us the benediction. Sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the benediction.
How do we then from this day become resilient? And what do we do in taking part in resolving what needs to happen? What is our duty? And do we really believe that every child is our child? In the words of, and it's been attributed to St. Francis, I challenge you, please, right before the prayer, to hear this written prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we are born to eternal life. My prayer, even before coming here today, Lord, allow, please, the words that are spoken be words that we will always remember. Manifest yourself in some way that we will remember this day as being a day of commitment. Let the song be one that will ring clearly in our ears, and we will remember, perhaps not the words, but the voice. And the resounding song was there. And so we pray, shall we? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you. And in the name of Jesus, may he grant you peace. God bless you. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the departure of our official party. This concludes today's ceremony. Thank you for your attendance and enjoy the rest of your day.